Hello and welcome to episode 108-ish of the Alfa Romeo Driver Podcast, brought to you by the Alfa Romeo Owners Club. As this is our 5th birthday episode, I thought we'd invite back our most popular guest, but Mike Brewer wasn't available, nor was Jamie Porter of Alfa Workshop and Alfa Romeo Driver Magazine, of course, or our third-ranked guest, Andrew Banks from Alfaholics, of whom more later. But David Fothel was available, and as well as being our first ever guest, he also features in 4 of the top 10 most downloaded episodes ever, so not a bad substitute. Good afternoon, David.
Good afternoon, Guy.
So when we started doing this back in 2020, during the first lockdown, I don't think we'd ever imagined that we'd still be going 108-ish episodes later. Some of the live ones didn't get numbered properly, which is why we're not completely sure how many we did, and 5 years later. So I thought we'd start with a few highlights. So we've done about 110 episodes.
And judging by the latest stats, more than 60,000 downloads. That is a lot.
It is. We've featured all of the club's board members, except Peter Farker. We're still working on that one.
And we've had a really good selection of section secretaries all over the country. And of course, our registrars from pre-war up to the Tonale.
We've had 3 Alfa Romeo managing directors.
And 5 episodes of the one-off No Such Thing as a Brera Quadrifolio.
Yeah, it didn't quite end up as a one-off, did it? 1 best-selling crime fiction novelist.
1 group road test, which worked better on audio only than you might expect.
3 TV stars, which were?
Mike Brewer, Vicky Butler-Henderson and Anstead.
Indeed. And a couple of takeovers by Alpha Female and by Arok Ragazzi. A couple of things that I've found as we were doing the research for this episode. Sunday's our busiest day of the week in terms of download, which is not a major surprise because that's when our new episodes drop. And it then falls away through the week with Monday 2nd, Tuesday 3rd, Thursday oddly is next, and then Wednesday, and then Friday and Saturday.
It looks like 58.9% of downloads are via Apple iOS and 1 download via the Xbox.
Yeah, 1 download out of 60,000 on Xbox. There may be lots of Xbox users on YouTube because they don't get included in the stats. 31% come to us through Apple Podcasts, 21% through Spotify, and about 10% looking at the stats actually watch a blank screen and listen to the podcast on YouTube.
Well, and 60% are from the UK, which isn't a big shock, obviously, being a UK-based club, but we get 16% from our friends in the USA, though that may include some UK users with USA domains. We get about 6% in Australia, and 1 download each from Bulgaria, Georgia, Guam, Isle of Man, Jersey, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, Laos, Lebanon, Monaco, Macau, Nepal, Peru, Pakistan, Togo, Tanzania, and Vietnam.
So we need to find out how to get those people to come back. Be nice to have a couple from some of those. For those of you who've been listening from the beginning, we actually started weekly, which was ambitious, but none of us had anything better to do during lockdown. So we managed 9 episodes on a weekly basis and then moved fortnightly until July 2023. And we've been monthly more or less since then. So what we thought we'd do in this episode is to look back at some of our favourite episodes from the past, starting with a very early one from you, David.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether to... Well, I couldn't start with the first one because that was me and that would just be too big-headed. So I've gone in with...
That is our 3rd highest download ever episode. But I think having been up for 5 years helps.
Yeah, that would help. Plus, of course, it was our first ever one, so it probably peaked at the level of interest on day 1. So I'm starting with episode 8, which is from June 2020, which is still a long time ago. And this featured yourself, my good self, our chairman, John Griffiths, and Auto Italia owner, publisher, photographer, Michael Ward. And it was really aimed at the 110th anniversary that Alfa Romeo led. And bear in mind, we're coming up to the 115th. So it does show how long we've been doing these things. So yeah, I sort of picked this one as my first one because June 2020, lockdown, it was such a strange time, wasn't it? And this episode's really reminiscent of that period because it was the year that we had to cancel National Alpha Day. And we were talking about how on earth we'd get back to having social events Michael described that Auto Italia, of course, who kept going throughout the lockdown, as did Alfa Romeo Driver, of course. But Michael described the challenges that they were having. With all of that sort of, oh no, woe is us, we're in the midst of a lockdown, there was this really sort of positive but online-only event at the Alfa Romeo Museum to celebrate the 110th anniversary. And we'd all watched that and we'd all enjoyed it. I guess it was a sort of a break from the lockdown that we were all in the middle of. We were sort of sat remotely watching the 110th anniversary happening live at the Alfa Romeo Museum. And it was just a nice break from what had started to become our new norm. And we all had a good old chin wag about what's the highlights from the last 110 years and our thoughts for the future. And we did actually, albeit 5 years ago, we were talking about potential of EVs and the likelihood of a new B segment Alfa Romeo, which now exists.
As a B segment EV?
Well, yes, quite. So yeah, I thought I'd start with that one because that was sort of in the thick of it, of lockdowns, but we were all strangely upbeat. I listened to it again the other day and yeah, it was kind of muddling through, but also there were absolutely positive aspects to that. And I think we kept our magazine going. We kept the club going. We launched new events during that period. Michael Ward and the whole crew at Auto Italia kept their magazine going despite the issues. And there we were watching remotely on all of our screens, the 110th anniversary of Alfa Romeo happening live at the museum. So yeah, both interesting, bit of excitement, slightly surreal, but I thought I'd start there.
Yeah. And of course, Italy had a really hard time of lockdown, particularly early on, long before we did. So it was the museum were kind of coming out of it slightly ahead of the rest of us, or Italy was coming out slightly ahead of the rest of us.
Funny enough, listening back to it, even now I found it quite cathartic. Do you know what I mean? I think it would have been like that for us then, back in that June 2020. There was light at the end of the tunnel. We were planning to run events. Michael and Auto Italia had events booked from September. We had events booked from September. So yeah, it was kind of coming out of the worst of it, I guess. And yeah, it was quite uplifting and cathartic to listen to it. I enjoyed re-listening to that one.
There's a clip from that episode where Michael explains some of the challenges he faced.
Tell me a little bit about what you've been up to during the lockdown, because you've been managing to get a magazine out as we have, and that's not been particularly easy. Tell me about some of the challenges you've had over the last couple of months.
Well, we're in a privileged position where we're actually a small publisher. So both myself and my partner work from home. So, you know, we are social distancing anyway, so we don't have any massive overheads. We don't have lots of staff. Our editor, Chris Rees, is freelance. He lives in Ascot. And our our printers are down in St Albans, and all we do is send them PDFs over the internet. But I'm very pleased and proud to say we simply haven't stopped publishing because we have a massive archive and backlog of features to go in the magazine anyway. So we always try and work 2 or 3 months ahead of ourselves. The one thing I personally have missed is actually doing photo shoots. I think I've done 3 since March, and that was one just before lockdown, and then two recently when things have started to ease a bit. So for me, not photographing cars has been quite a hard thing. But on the publishing front, it's been quite challenging to get the magazine out there, as in physically, with the transport situation, because Barnes & Noble in the States, they simply shut their doors. So I have pallets of magazines, thousands of magazines, on a dockside somewhere that aren't going into shops at the moment, which is obviously quite frustrating. New Zealand, Australia, South America, in fact, they all closed their doors as well. So it was very, very frustrating producing a magazine in print form for it not really to go anywhere. Obviously, with WH Smith closed, that was a double whammy. So again, I won't even scare myself with the figures of our first lockdown issue because nobody could buy on the shelves. But luckily, we have a fantastic and loyal subscriber database. And at the end of the day, those lovely people have paid for their magazine. And for me to stop publishing would be somewhat disloyal. So yeah, we've carried on publishing. I think the magazine looks better than ever. We've always got fresh stuff to put in. So it's been slightly challenging, but rewarding in the same way. We've had comments from Australia, magazines are getting through now, and New Zealand have thanked us for carrying on publishing. I know it's been very hard out there for the bigger boys, the Kelseys, the CHPs, and the Bowers of the world. I know there's at least 3 or 4 motoring magazines that simply won't come back. They have actually shut their doors for good, which is sad. Quite good for me because there's a little bit more shelf space as an independent, but it's a challenging time for everyone.
You're right, though. It is a really good listen. I've leapt forward hugely in time for the next episode because my first pick is episode 9 the following week. which was actually our last weekly episode as it happened before we moved to fortnightly. And I can't remember who it was suggested that we should approach Mike Brewer of Wheeler Dealers and other things to see if he'd like to participate. But I did kind of not in much hope that we would get a positive response. But I think like everybody else, there wasn't an awful lot else for him to do.
Had nothing else going on, yeah.
No, he wasn't making TV shows. So he was happy to come on. And it was a little bit different in that it was probably the first time we'd spoken to somebody who wasn't a dyed-in-the-wool Alfisty. You know, it was, we talked about a wide range of subjects, but all obviously car related. We did talk about a couple of episodes of Wheeler Dealers that they'd done, which were Alfa related. There was a 164 that they did in the US with Ann Anstead, but I think the one that we talked about the most was the famous Black Alfa Sud episode, which caused quite a lot of controversy. I think that car's still around, but some of the modifications that were done to the car were perhaps ones that Alfa aficionados might not want to see done to an Alfa Sud. So I did raise the issue of the poly bushes in the suspension to Mike, but he was quite happy to defend the decision.
Yeah, and I think, look, it's the same the world over with every type of Alfa Romeo. Some of us love them to be kept as they came out of the factory, and some of us know that they can be improved upon based on what some of the things that came out of the factory were like. So the poly bushes, I would say, are an improvement on an Alfa Sud. But I thought Mike Brewer's, he's one of those sort of love or hate characters. I like him. I think he would be in my top 5 diamond geezers along with Danny Dyer and Tom Hardy. So I enjoyed that episode, and we crossed paths with him at an NEC a year or so later, and he was very, very friendly and immediately knew the club and so on. So yeah, I think you were probably a bit harsh on him, but I enjoyed that episode, and I am in the camp of I quite like Mike Brewer actually.
I quite like Mike Brewer actually, and he was a very good guest. He was very, very willing and enthusiastic, and gave us a fair chunk of his time. Here he is talking about some of his Alfa ownership history. Now, obviously, a lot of the listeners to this podcast are primarily interested in things Alfa Romeo related. I was quite surprised when I looked back at the episode list, because in my mind, there were a lot more Alfas in there, but I guess that's what comes from watching the same episodes again and again and again on repeat. In fact, you've only done 4 Alfas out of all the cars you've done, and 2 of those since you moved to the States. I think 2 Spiders, an Alfa Sud and a 164. The one you seemed most excited about, though, was the Sud.
Sud. Oh my God, I love that car. Listen, I'm a mega, massive, huge Alfa fan. And you would have seen this every time I feature an Alfa on Wheeler Dealers. You would have heard me say these words. If you're a car person, at one time in your life, you need to own an Alfa Romeo. Otherwise, you simply won't understand automotive engineering, automotive excellence, and design language. You won't understand it, because Alfa, let's face it, the difference between what I tried to say to the audience is the difference between an Alfa and a Ford Focus is an Alfa was designed by people that absolutely loved it. You can feel every part of that car is built with passion and love, where a Ford Focus is built by a robot on a computer. If you can get that across to the audience, and I try every single time I sit behind the wheel of an Alfa, it's gold. It's golden if I can deliver that message to the audience. And yes, we have done a few on Wheeler Dealers. We've done 4. There might be some more coming up in the future, which I'm not allowed to tell you about, but we have done 4. But the Alfa Sud is by far my favourite. I'm a kid of the 80s, I love that hot hatch feel. And I just remember, the first time I got in that 1.5 Alfa Sud when I was a kid and put my foot down with that little raspy engine, I was transfixed. I thought, God, I thought it was better than a Golf GTI, a Peugeot 205. I thought it was better than everything.
Yeah, I've had 3. I've had 2 Sprints and an Alfa Sud Saloon, and I'd have another one tomorrow.
So would I, if you can find one.
The next one that I picked, which was a few months later, episode 29, I kind of think of it as the first Alfa female podcast, but it was actually before the section was formed. And I think we billed it as a sections and registrars or sections and registers round table. But we deliberately chose to have Kirsty Hodson, who's a board member, and I think from memory had just taken over running the Thames Valley section. Mel Westwell, who's co-running the Goodwood section, and Carol Corliss, who of course looks after the pre-war register and was responsible for that fantastic array of vehicles that we had at National Alpha Day last year. And it was one of the most enjoyable ones that I've had the privilege of hosting, because the three of them just got on so well and swapped some really interesting stories. And it was just nice to have a different perspective from the 28 episodes of stale males that had gone before.
Yeah, and I think, and it does bring something fresh and new and different, doesn't it? Because, you put 3 or 4 men in a room and say, talk about Alfa Romeo, you'll get a certain set of topics and a certain set of gripes. But you ask females, they just come at it from a slightly different angle. They still have exactly the same or more passion in the cars, but they think about other topics and they cover different angles. I think the creation of Alpha Female is a real stroke of genius for the club, because it gives women a place where they know they belong, where they know they're safe, but also they can talk about the stuff that's more interesting to them. They're still going to talk about nerdy car stuff, of course, because they're also wired up that way. But I really enjoy the Alpha Female podcast. As you say, I think this was more of a female podcast with alphas. Yeah. Because I think it did slightly predate the creation of Alpha Female. But yeah, honestly, I wish all the car clubs would do this, because I think it would be a more welcoming home for people to go to, where they can have a shared love of the cars or the car brand, but also make real permanent, lifelong friendships as well.
Here's Carol talking about Alfisti in the club, but also all over the world.
No, I think there's a great camaraderie in the club, and it particularly reminds me when we did the centenary down in Milan. That was one of the last big events I did with my Alfa, and on the way back, we'd left the car parked in the underground car park in this hotel. And there were some young lads that were falling around. Well, we didn't realise until we got about an hour up the road, they'd put dirt in my filler cap. And we were in a tunnel, the one that goes up out of Como towards the Swiss border. And it stopped in the middle of this tunnel. And if you've ever been in a tunnel with single track, just a single track road with lorries coming up behind you, it was terrifying.
Well, it'd be bad enough in a modern car, but...
Yeah, I mean, the lights on those things aren't that good. Anyway, I felt very vulnerable, and I just said, resist the temptation, count to 10, because I was sure it was petrol, and I thought if I give it a moment or two, enough will filter through. And it did, and it got us out of the tunnel. But when we'd got to the other end, we staggered onto the hard shoulder, and there were about 10 Alphas stopped. A lot of the Dutch brigade, all the Dutch were down there in force, but they all, practically every car coming along stopped. We had to keep waving them on, because it was an embarrassment, really. There were about 12 Alphas stopped at the side of the hard shoulder.
And we absolutely didn't do this deliberately, but your next choice is actually, again, is the episode after the one we've just talked about.
Yeah, it's funny because it kind of looks like we've just gone through, the first dozen or something. No, I think this one has always sort of struck me as one of the most fascinating ones that we've done. And obviously that's subjective, but this is episode 30 from April 2021, and this is Andrew Banks from Alfaholics. And I kind of find it really fascinating to get insight into Alfaholics, and particularly at that time it was their GTA R290, which was sort of doing the rounds, wasn't it? It was on Top Gear and what have you, but everywhere you looked there was this GTA R290, and we all wanted to know more about it. And I think it was kudos to you for getting Andrew Banks along to do the podcast, because he did describe in some detail about the effort gone into it and the meticulous work and so on. And I find that level of development, that level of work and effort that they put into their cars absolutely astonishing. It's expensive, of course, because these things don't come cheap. And whilst I suspect, despite my hopes and dreams, I suspect I won't have the level of money available to order a car with Alfaholics. The fact that Alfaholics exist and that they are in business and doing quite well, and that they can take a 105 and make it an astonishing, unique piece of art for the road or track, and their use of carbon and titanium and so on. It's just, it's just another little world, isn't it? And that really came across because Andrew Banks seems, I've not met him in person, I don't think, but he seems just like a normal guy. And he and his brother run Alfaholics and race Alfa Romeos, of course. I just find that whole episode really fascinating. And when you learn more about Alfaholics, you kind of get the passion and the effort that goes into everything that they do. And I thought that really came through in that episode.
Yeah, and that was one of the more difficult ones to arrange because they're just so busy. And Andrew was very keen to be involved, but just finding a slot when he could do it. I think that was the year the GTAR 291 Evo's track car of the year. And you think about the competition, all the things you might choose as a track toy to win that prize, I think is quite remarkable. This is Andrew talking about Top Gear's Chris Harris's time with the GTA 290R.
People will have seen Chris Harris in the GTAR on Top Gear, and there have been a few GTAR reviews over the years. What kind of effect does that have on demand? Do you literally get people phone up to make an inquiry afterwards, or is it all just part of building the legend of the car?
Well, we've never set out to chase the press and to try and chase the coverage on the cars. You know, Chris Harris approached us a few years ago when he did the video that most people seem to have seen when he drove the car at Landau and he thrashed it around Landau all day and seemed to really enjoy himself. And it's amazing how many people have seen that video. I think it's great because I think it enables, you know, Chris is incredibly articulate and he's very good at being able to describe what a car feels like, and he's able to transmit what his feelings are as he's driving that car. And I think it's wonderful that he's able to, you know, that he can do that with our car, and no doubt that's enabled people to get a bit of an insight into what it's like to drive one of these cars. And really up until that point, we hadn't had very much coverage at all. We'd sort of carried on doing our own thing. Obviously, we had our track day, and that's perhaps an opportunity for us to be able to take people out in the cars and showcase them a bit. But really, that video that Chris did was the first time that people across the world could, I suppose, get a real flavour from somebody, you know, who's a very good driver and who's totally independent, to be able to see what they're really like. So there's no question that that's been great. And then, of course, there was the recent Top Gear episode. And also Jeremy Clarkson came down and drove the car, and he thoroughly enjoyed it as well. And that was seen by a lot of people in his column in the Sunday Times. So, yeah, it's fair to say we have had a fair bit of press coverage recently.
Weren't you a bit of a strange wildcard entry into the Evo Car of the Year track day category a couple of years ago as well?
Yeah, we were. Yeah. The guys were keen to have the car, and they had a huge amount of fun in it. I think it's been interesting because it's opened people's eyes a little bit in terms of, you know, we're not the only people doing these termed resto mods, and I think some of the journalists have been surprised at how well the cars perform and you know, how durable they are as well. And you consider how much thrashing our demo GTAR gets with all the journalists, and it just stands up to all the abuse so well. So,
well, and you consider how little of it there is left. I mean that in the best possible way, with, you know, the drilled hinges and all of those kind of things. You know, the potential for it to not stand up, I guess, is there, but it does.
Yeah, I mean, we've done obviously, as you will probably know, we've done a huge amount of work behind the scenes. I mean, I think back to the early days when we were going to the Nürburgring. You know, we're going to the Nürburgring in the mid 2000s with these cars and thrashing them round and round the track for sometimes days on end at times. And, you know, we did all the aluminium dampers that we offer. All the development was done at the Nürburgring alongside places in Wales and locally as well. But a lot of the work was done there, and that really enabled us to fine tune the valving on the dampers.
The other episode that this kind of reminds me of, which is not one of our picks as such, a couple of months later, we spoke to Jim Stokes, who kind of does a similar thing, I guess, although probably, you know, more faithful to the original engineering, but mostly around pre and immediately post-war cars. But again, similar level of passion and insight into the engineering. I thought the thing that was quite interesting about both of them was working on classic Alfas, but still using CAD/CAM and 3D printing and whatever it takes to make the cars as good and high performing and reliable as they can be.
Yeah, and it does go to show, doesn't it, that you can mix traditional ways of working with modern technologies to create an even better outcome. And I think that's a really important thing for us all to keep in mind, that of course we can all be in our garages covered in oil and with rusty spanners and what have you. But I think if you really want to take something pre or post or just post-war and evolve it, then, the mix of modern technology and modern methods with traditional ways of working is the way to go. And I think that's evidenced, isn't it? Both Alcoholics and Jim Stokes as well.
Yeah. So my next choice is part of a different trend that listeners won't be aware of, which is whenever I get involved in a new hobby, I always end up on this escalator of buying new kit that I don't really need that might be slightly better than I had before. So I think by this point, episode 37 in August 2021, I was probably on about my fourth podcast microphone. But one of the toys that I bought somewhere around this point was a field microphone with the ability to mix multiple sources and record stuff outside. And I thought we would do lots of those in the future as kind of outside broadcast podcasts. I think we've done about 3 since then. But the very first one we did was with Colin Cunniff and Paul Plant. So Colin, for those of you who don't remember, he's been on a few episodes now, but Colin won our sim racing, also set up during lockdown, sim racing competition to select a sim racing driver to drive for real in the Alfa Romeo Championship. Paul Plant was the one who sponsored that competition and provided the drive for Colin. So that was recorded at Snetterton during Colin's first outing for Bianco. And it was recorded very optimistically outside one of the Snetterton cafes at a picnic table with my new outside broadcast mic, forgetting that there was motor racing going on. So there was cars tearing down the straight on one side of us. And we realised soon into the conversation that the picnic table we'd chosen was right next to where one of the recovery vehicles parked between track recoveries. So we were constantly having to stop because we couldn't hear ourselves over the vehicle reversing beeps. But it was quite nice. It was the first one that we'd done that wasn't on Zoom. So not only was it an outside broadcast, but it was the three of us sitting there having a conversation face to face after, even by 2021, we were still kind of suffering the effects of lockdown. So that was just a very nice, different atmosphere and another fun one to do.
But it sounds like you bought the quiet field mic, not the noise field mic.
I actually bought 2 of each, not knowing which I'd need, and then had a 3-way interview. So I had to use 2 focused ones and 1 not quite so focused one. But yeah,
you'd have been better off buying a very thick tent to take with you and bringing people inside.
If I'm absolutely honest, we would have been better off doing it on Monday by Zoom. But it was fun to do, and it was a lovely sunny day. Here's a bit we managed to get without the truck reversing. How was the first stint out on the track?
Scary, very, very, very scary. I just never anticipated how real it would be. Like, I don't know, I had nothing to expect really, but just the first time I slammed on the brakes going into the hairpin really spooked me, just how much I got thrown forward with the G-force. It's just a road car, come on, it can't be that bad. So it took a while to build up the confidence. Going around the corners was not too bad. I had the car moving quite early on, but the first session I just was scared to press the brake effectively and just wasn't getting the line right. And then second session was much better. Got told just slam on the brakes, just do it. Paul was really good with it, just taught me through everything to do. So just slam on the brakes, let the ABS do all the work, which on the sim I've turned ABS off, so it was quite alien to me.
But I know the purpose of Friday wasn't to set times, but I think he was within 3.5 seconds of the previous now championship leader.
Yeah, I think it's 27 was it? 29?
You said 27, I think it was.
27. So from the pace of the weekend and what Andrew had done the couple of sessions before, it was that one session only a few seconds off, which and a long circuit like this sometimes seasons regulars at that point as well.
Your next episode, again, we're not taking a big leap forward, is episode 41, and a very different look at car restoration from the Alfaholics and Jim Stokes of this world.
Yeah, so episode 41. So this is back in September 2021. And this is Ian Jeffcott. And I think it was entitled Ian Jeffcott, Berliner and Arne Restorer, or something along those lines. But I've met Ian several times, but in passing. So you know, he's not a chum or anything like that. But what I love about him is he rescues the underdogs and brings them back to showroom condition. And he does it himself in a shed. He doesn't have all the new technologies, though I'm sure he has some, but he uses traditional methods. And he's basically a normal bloke from the West Midlands. I also quite like, I was going to say he's got a Brummie accent. I think he's from Wolverhampton. So he's got a West Midlands accent. That just makes him sound even more normal to me. He did a brilliant restoration on an Arna, that green Arna that he restored, and that sort of goes around, and you see that at events. He's done another Arna, I think, and he's done his Berliners and what have you. So look, it's just a really interesting ramble, that podcast. A normal bloke who does really high quality work on his own in his workshop, restoring Alfa Romeos. And when you see the one or two cars that sort of pop up at events, that was the Ian Jeffcott restoration in his shed, you'll see the quality of his work. And the other thing Ian does is he's very open to sharing all of the photos and progress and so on that he does on both our forum, but on our Facebook groups and so on. So if you've never met or have never heard of Ian Jeffcott, do look him up on our Facebook groups or on the forum, because it's just a normal guy. And that podcast I found really refreshing, because, you know, we often talk to either very famous or very wealthy people, and Ian's neither of those, but the quality of his workmanship really shows through, and the outcomes of the cars he's done are brilliant. And he's just a normal bloke. It's a lovely podcast. I really enjoyed it. I've listened to that probably 5 times in the last 3 or 4 years, actually. So definitely worth a listen to, that one.
Yeah. And I think, speaking to Ian, there's been a couple of times when people have said to him, given the quality of his work, you know, why didn't he set up a business and do that full time? And I think he's been tempted a couple of times, but feels that he'd lose the passion. And there is just something about having that as something to take your mind off the day job and just get absorbed in the process of restoring, as you say, a car that if Ian didn't do it, perhaps nobody would.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually, particularly with the Arnas. I mean, they are becoming more loved and more popular, albeit in a relatively small community. But yeah, there's definitely that trait that, yeah, they could have ended up as a spares car, but instead Ian got hold of it. And I think that's a hugely positive thing for the Alfa community, but for the cars themselves as well.
Yeah. Here's Ian making something really quite difficult sound straightforward.
How difficult is it to do a restoration on a Berliner? Because, I mean, if it was a Bertoni Coupe or even an older saloon, there's lots of remanufactured parts, and you know, most things are reasonably well available. What's the situation with the Berliners?
A lot of the structural parts, chassis repair panels, front radiator crossmember, jacking points, floor pans, are very, in some ways they're either very similar or very adaptable from the Coupe, the Spider and the Giulia. They share a lot of parts, or they're very close enough that you can adapt them in some way. Even something like the middle sill in between the visible outer and inner, got that down to a fine art now, where you take the Giulia replacement panel and it is identical in shape and profile, other than the length, because the Berliner wheelbase is another 60 mil. So we've now got it to a point where it's at a strategic point. You can cut it through at a certain point and extend it by 60 mil just by welding in an additional strip to make it an actual full replacement panel then that will quite simply drop into place then.
Yeah.
Without having to adapt it on the car. Outer sill, again, the majority of the profile is the same as the Giulia, with some strategic cutting and adaptation, make it fit. A lot of the external panels are unfortunately not available. Some of the little lower repair wing panels and so on can be adapted. But a lot of it is, if you're lucky, you'll find some new old stock parts out there that pop up on the various auction websites and the like. But other than that, it's a case of having to repair what you've got by taking what's left of a rusty panel and use what you can as a pattern and make it from scratch.
When I was scanning through our notes on the episodes we've chosen, almost everyone has some variation on really nice bloke, lovely guy. Yeah, really nice to talk to, really nice to listen to. And I think our next one is one of those again. We're slowly creeping forward. We're moving into to March 22 now, and episode 54, which is another one of your picks.
Yeah, I mean, again, if I had to pick, well, I have had to pick my top 5 podcasts, but if I had to pick the 5 that I would download and take on a long car journey, this is definitely one of them. So episode 54 from March 22, this is Alan Greenhouse, who, for those who may or may not remember, he commissioned one of the £250,000 Giulia GTA M's. And you'll have seen his very obvious car at many of our shows, actually. It's the red GTA M, and it's got a very memorable number plate, which I won't give out, but I suspect most people would remember it. So Alan, look, for someone who ordered I'm saying it's a £250,000 car. It probably was close to that sort of a number. You want to be jealous and you kind of want to hate people like that. But he's just a completely normal, really nice, really genuine guy. And you can't dislike him because he's gone to so much effort and put so much passion into his love of Alfa Romeo, whether it's his 147 GTA or I think he had a 4C. I don't know if he's still got a 4C. But he must have a presumably very patient and understanding wife, because I don't think I'd be able to do what he's done. But
I think it helps that his wife's also a massive Alfa fan and owns a Tonale Q4 like all the best people do.
In this podcast, he talks through and gives really fascinating insight into the end-to-end process he had to go through. And he had to jump through some hoops. It's not like, I could just join the queue for a GTA M. It was pretty tough to get on the waiting list. And then he describes everything that he had to go through. And the journey is really fascinating.
As I said, I don't recommend anyone listens to the whole thing.
When I knew more about the GTA M, it was the car that we were looking for. And of course, I didn't know much. But what I did know is that I would learn more at Geneva. And so March 2020, I booked a flight to Geneva to go to the motor show, and I had a hotel.
Nice, quiet, uneventful month.
Yes, exactly. I had a hotel booked and everything, and was led to believe I would see something interesting. So, and then of course the world ended, and the COVID came along, and there was no Geneva Motor Show, and I reevaluated, and I obviously watched the online launch with some anticipation. I was all over that and decided straight away that whatever the GTA was, it was the car that we were going to add next to the garage. I had no idea how you go about that, but what I did the very next morning is I went down to my local Alfa dealer, and with the uncertainty about how the order process would work, I prepared. And this is the embarrassing bit, Guy, but I prepared a presentation which was basically to convince the dealer that if they were giving out allocations for GTAs, that I was the man. And so I had the story of the 147 GTA. I had photos from all the trips we'd done. I'd had photos of club events that I'd been to, and off I sat down there, and I walked into the dealership and found a guy who looked like a sales manager, and I sat at his desk and said, I want to buy a car. And he smiled and said, which one? And I told him, and I proceeded to do my pitch. And within 30 seconds, he stopped me and he asked the rest of the staff at the dealership to gather round, which threw me a little bit. And I continued with my pitch and feeling quite embarrassed. But they thanked me for the pitch. They told me they'd never seen anything like that before, and then told me that the only thing they knew about a GTA is what they'd seen on the webcast launch the day before.
Alan brings his car to loads of events. It's an absolute thing of beauty, and I absolutely fall in love with it every time I see it. And Alan's done a lot for the club. He's a great ambassador, both for Alfa Romeo and for our club. I think he recently bought an incredibly cool looking white 8C Spider, and he had both the Giulia GTAM and the 8C Spider at National Alpha Day last year. Honestly, this is really worth a listen, because I still want to be jealous of him. I just can't, because I'm just absolutely delighted for him that he's able to do that, because he's a lovely, lovely guy. We're a car club, right? So it should be all about the cars. But since I've joined the club, it's all about the people. Actually, we happen to own and love the cars, but for me, this club is about the people, the members of the club. And you do genuinely meet new friends, exciting and interesting people, nerdy people. But we all have, broadly speaking, the same sort of passions. We might have, a specific fixation on an individual model of Alfa Romeo. But yeah, it is funny that sort of theme coming through on these top 10 podcasts that we've chosen. They're mostly about people, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they happen to be talking about cars, as opposed to they're about cars that happen to have people talking about them. So I think it's a really important thing for our club, because it can be easy to lose sight of that. Behind every event, every local section meeting, every register, every podcast, every change to the website, there's people doing things. And that's what it's all about, really.
I'm glad you said that, because my next two picks don't involve people at all.
Okay. Well, that's just ruined. That's ruined my theory. But anyway,
they involve people, but they're not the subject of the podcast.
No, okay.
So we jump forward over a year now to episode 94, which is one of the ones that isn't really included in the list of podcasts for various reasons, because we were experimenting with a feature to do a live stream. So I think it's now called episode 94 Junior Live. Obviously, at the time that it was originally put out, it was called episode 94 Milano Live. And of the 11 or 12 episodes that we're talking about in this one, it's probably the one that I wouldn't necessarily recommend people go and listen to. But it's memorable for me because it was just utter chaos. We'd never done the live stream before. We didn't know what was going to happen at the event, kind of following the event on video and watching other news feeds from people who were at the event and getting press packs and extracting things from that. Some of the tech didn't work. We had people who were leaving live comments on the live stream with things that we'd missed. So we're kind of picking up on those and throwing them into the conversation. And technically it's an absolute mess, but it was just an absolute hoot to do.
So let's just summarize. You're not recommending anyone listens to this, is that right?
If you like a laugh, it's no, I wouldn't recommend anyone listen to it.
Well, let me change that, because I think you should listen to it. People should listen to it, because it was as if you'd got primary school children and asked them to run a podcast for something they knew nothing about that was happening in real time, but with about a 60-second delay. I think it was fun at the time. I don't remember it being stressful at the time. It felt like we were pioneering and leading from the front. But of course, it did quickly crumble away. So
I think the level of amateurishness would have been fine if it had been episode 4, but as it was episode 94,
we'd lost the advantage of saying we're new at this.
Yeah,
but there we go.
We were new at that. We'd not done a live stream before.
Yeah, true.
We've done 2 now, and the second one worked.
Okay.
Actually, we've done 3, but the third one worked really well. As I said, I don't recommend anyone listens to the whole thing, but to give you a flavour of what we're talking about. Hello and welcome to episode 94A, 94 and a bit, 94 of the Alfa Romeo Driver Podcast. I'm Guy Swarbrick, and with me I have David Faithful. Good afternoon, David. Good evening.
Good afternoon and good evening.
I hope David can hear me, and I hope you can hear me as the audience. I can see my microphone moving, but I can't actually hear myself. So bear with me. We had some technical issues the last time we used Podbean Live, so I will see if I can figure out what's going on. It did get better once we got over the initial hurdles, just to be fair. Yeah, I thought we'd start with the elephant in the room. Obviously, everybody's avoiding this. Nobody's mentioned it on social media yet, but The new Milano appears to be an SUV.
It does seem very SUV-like. I think that was a shock to everybody. But we know what the sales figures are like across Europe for small SUVs. We've known it's going to be an SUV. Yet we still have people online who are absolutely shocked, that it's turned up as an SUV.
Who seem to be the same people who were shocked when the name was announced and they thought it was an SUV. And the spy shots from Bolocco were released and they said, oh, it's an SUV.
I think we had the same when Tonale was released as well, though. So I think it's, it's a common attribute, perhaps, of Alfa Romeo fans. What they want is a sport wagon or a Spider, and they're not going to be happy until they see one, I suspect.
Or a coupe. So my next choice, and I could have chosen any of the five, and we touched on it earlier on. Quite early on, I came up with this idea of doing a spoof of one of my favorite non-car related podcasts, No Such Thing as a Fish, which is done by the team that researches QI, and was kind of trying to think of what kind of hook we could use, and was having a conversation about taking a Mille Miglia edition 939 Spider to National Alpha Day. In fact, we're trying to find a pair of them to take along, the pair of UK cars. And in part of that conversation, somebody pointed out that was the only 939 series car, Spider, Brera or 159, that had quadrifoglio badges on it from the factory, even though it wasn't branded as a quadrifoglio. Yeah. So that gave us our hook. And the first episode was just called No Such Thing as a Brera quadrifoglio. And we've done 5, and they're a little bit different from the other episodes. They're a little bit quirky, much more scripted because we're looking at facts that we've researched. And I think they're quite good fun. But the last one we did, I thought was particularly interesting. So we found a link to Google's patent database and did a search for Alfa Romeo related patents because, as a marque, they have been innovators in lots of different technologies. But we kind of looked for ones that hadn't necessarily changed the world. So some of the things that Alfa pioneered, now everybody does. Some of the things Alfa pioneered, nobody ever did again. And so that was quite fun digging into there. I've cheated a little bit with the clip here because I really want you to go and listen to all of episode 100. No Such Thing as a Laser Handbrake. So I'm including a clip from the previous instalment, episode 86, No Such Thing as Savocci's Triangular Quadrifoglio, which included a story that actually drove a lot of our patent searches for episode 100, and where I managed to tie several of my anoraks together in one particularly tenuous anecdote about Alfa Romeo aero engines and Fleet Air Arm aircraft. There's another link to Southwest Alpha Day too. Bear with me on this one. The Royal Naval Air Service, now the Fleet Air Arm, based at Yeovilton, just down the road from the Haynes Motor Museum, had 6 Caproni CA4 bombers during the First World War, based initially at Taranto in Puglia. They didn't actually see service.
The crews probably hang around looking super cool, though.
Naval aviators. How could they possibly do anything else? The Capronis were returned to Italy after the war, but they were quite a sight. The CA4 was the triplane version of arguably the most successful biplane heavy bomber of World War I. Over 250 were built for the Italian Army and Navy. It was powered by 3 Isotta Fraschini V6 liquid-cooled 270 horsepower engines. One was even converted into a seaplane, a triplane seaplane. But the tenuous links don't end there. In the Second World War, a Fairey Swordfish biplane torpedo bomber, most famous ironically for a raid on the fleet at anchor at Taranto, which effectively ended the Italian Navy's operations in the Mediterranean, was damaged by anti-aircraft fire and forced to land at the naval base at Elmas, near Cagliari in Sardinia. It was later repaired by Caproni, of course, and flown by the Italian Navy, fitted with an Alfa Romeo 125 Aero engine, which was a license-built version of the Swordfish's original Bristol Pegasus engine.
And if that wasn't tenuous enough, Rolls-Royce later revived the Pegasus name for the engine that powered the Harrier, flown by both the Royal Navy and the Italian Marina Militare.
The next one is another one of yours. In fact, it's your last one and the last one, and our successful live stream, I think.
Yeah, so I couldn't be at this NEC, but which is part of the reason why I really like this, but episode 102 was live from the NEC podcast lounge. This was November 2024, so not very long ago. There's a couple of things. I think this was our first live video podcast. So we'd done live podcasts, but this was our live video podcast. And so as I think you mentioned earlier, everybody has the option to listen to our podcasts on YouTube, but this was the first one where you could watch people in full animatronics in the podcast lounge at the NEC. So this was Chairman John Griffiths, our club manager Nick, and yourself, Guy, in real time performing live on stage at the NEC.
With an audience.
With an audience.
With an actual audience.
Yeah.
I think peaked at about 40 people.
Well, that's very good. Was that just for the first few minutes? Or
he went down quite quickly after we started.
So, look, there's a couple of really positive things that I thought about this. One, there was some kudos involved that our club had got into the podcast lounge, because traditionally, I mean, I think it's quite a new concept anyway, but they only really allow the big car-related podcasts in there, whereas we were a club who happens to have a podcast that we started in lockdown, and we were in the podcast lounge. So there was kudos involved in that. The main thing for me was, well, two things. One, you were there in person. We could watch you in person in real time. And the second part really was that it was our 60th anniversary. So in 2024, the club had been going since 1964. It was our 60th anniversary. We did a lot of things for the 60th anniversary. But for me, the NEC is always, because it's at the end of the year in November, it's always cold. It's always, kind of the last thing you're going to do in terms of a national kind of event. And it sort of wrapped, for me at least, it wrapped up the 60th anniversary. And John talked through all of the really special cars we had on display. All had either a direct or a fairly tenuous link to the 60 years that we'd been going. But yes, so for people who don't know what you guys look like, and not everybody in the club obviously has met our chairman or has met Nick or has seen you in real life. So I think it's a really good, you could just go on YouTube and watch it. The audio version is just as listenable, if that's a word. Quite cool to see you, in person on video on our YouTube with our first live video podcast. But there was certainly some different kudos around it. Live audience at the NEC in the podcast lounge celebrating our 60th anniversary. And yeah, I just kind of, if you think about the difference between when a few Alfa Romeo owners met at the Steering Wheel Club in London in 1964 and decided, let's form a club. And you compare that to, where we are today, it's such a world apart. But can you imagine how fun it would be to have those original individuals from the Steering Wheel Club to record a podcast recording now? So I think, it's really worth a watch. If you can't get to watch it on YouTube, it's well worth a listen. It was kind of a new thing, but I thought it also sort of wrapped up the 60th anniversary year for us in 2024.
It's nice to hear that it's a nice watch. I haven't and will not watch it. Somebody once said to me that I had a face for radio, and then listened to the podcast and said I had a voice for print. So.
Well, I'm not going to argue on any of those points. However, I will say we all hate listening to ourselves, and we all hate seeing ourselves on video. Honestly, I think, if you think about how many members we got, 4,600 members across the globe, I bet 300 of them have seen you, Nick, John in real life. It's just, it does bring something different to it when you see the people instead of just hearing a voice in audio. Yeah, so I would recommend that. That's a good one for me.
So, to totally fail to make that point, here's our final audio clip.
Really, the Whopper is National Alpha Day. I mentioned it early on, but Vista Heritage is a brilliant venue for car clubs, and a couple of years ago we extended it to include the circuit as well. So we have parade laps led by a racing driver, funnily enough, this year driving a Stelvio rather than his own Alfa Spider. But it's a lovely opportunity.
I think he wore the door handles off his Spider, cornering the previous year.
He did, yeah. I mean, theoretically it's limited to about 60 miles an hour, but it's normally a little bit quicker than that. And it's actually tremendous fun. And I think there's about 400 cars take part in that in different time slots on that little less than 1 mile loop track, but for many it's the first time they've ever been on a racing track, even though it's a parade, and it's a lovely idea. You get an idea for what it's like.
And occasionally it's the first time they've ever run their Giulia Quadrifoglio in race mode.
Yeah, and then we've had a couple of incidents in race mode with them going sideways on cold Pirellis.
The tree looked better afterwards.
Yeah, so yes,
Giulia not so much.
We could gloss over that, couldn't we? But yeah, National Alpha Day this year, we, apart from the circuit, we had some spectacular cars along, and Carol Corliss, who's our organiser of the kind of historic register and very close with the VSCC, she's got so many contacts. She was able to invite her friends in these magnificent pre-war Alfa Romeos from, I think the earliest was a 1924, forgotten the model now, absolutely beautiful machine. So
it was an RLSS.
RLSS, 100 years old, and we had some of Sir Anthony Bamford's cars along as well.
Yellow with JCB logo.
Little JCB logos on them. But probably the best bit for me with those was when they had their parade lap, and I just come off the mic interviewing somebody or something, and then it was fire up time. And to hear these 8-cylinder machines and 6-cylinder inline supercharged cars fire up, it was like, wow. And then for them to go around the track chasing along the Junior Veloce electric car was like, this is a bizarre sight. Those guys, when they designed these cars 100 years ago, would they have ever believed it today?
So that's the highlights from the 107 or so episodes that preceded this one. Any thoughts about what we do next?
I think we've got to, what's really come through in this podcast is the people. And there's an obvious link that, if you're going to interview someone for a podcast, it should probably be a person. But I think we need to meet more people in the club. And I think, maybe we can do something with a newsletter or through the magazine that just pick members who, to all intents and purposes, aren't anything special. But every person we've ever met on the podcast and every person we meet at an event has something fascinating or interesting or inspiring about them. So maybe we do more of that. I mean, we've got to use your field mics more. So some out and about, live broadcasts perhaps. And we've got all of the events scheduled for this year, so we can do something with that. But I think we've got to remember why we started this. It was so our members had something to hear and got that feeling of, the broader collective of the Alfa Romeo Owners Club in the UK during very challenging, very difficult, and sometimes very, very tragic times. And I think we've got to make sure that we don't lose sight of it's about our members, it's about people. And we all have, you'll be bored of hearing all my stories now because they're all Mito or AlphaSud related, but everybody has 2 or 3 really interesting stories that I bet our thousands of members would love to hear. So yeah, maybe we switch things up. We still got a long list of people that we really want to interview, but maybe we get some more normals, just some ordinary people, ordinary club members, because I think they can be inspirational of themselves. If you're listening to this and you'd like to be on the podcast, just get in touch. We'll see what stories we've got to tell. Brilliant. Thank you, David. I did start going through the 108 episodes to try and tally up how many you'd been in, because I think I'm the only person who's been in more, but my mental arithmetic isn't that good. I lost count somewhere in the high 20s. So thank you for this and for all the other episodes you've been involved in. Well, thank you. We would be nowhere without you. So I think I speak on behalf of all the members when I say thank you, Guy. We really appreciate you. You may be glad to hear that we're done for this episode. Thanks for sticking with us to the end. Seriously, we hope you enjoyed that look back over the last 5 years and will be with us for the next 5. We'll be back in 4 weeks' time on Sunday the 1st of June. Episode 109 will be available to download from 1:30 p.m. from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podbean, YouTube, and everywhere else good podcasts are found. Until then, stay safe.